Okay. Welcome to Microcollege. This week on the podcast, we are really excited to have a couple of the founders and co-executive directors of one new emergent initiative in this educational space, microcolleges and holistic education. Another program inspired by Deep Springs in important ways. This is the Gull Island Institute, located on the islands near Woods Hole, Massachusetts, near Buzzards Bay. Joining me today are two of the founders, Isabel Keilson and Justin Reynolds. Raised in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, Justin Reynolds has taught in the social sciences concentration at Harvard, the core curriculum at Columbia University, and at Deep Springs College. He received his PhD in modern European history from Columbia University and his master's in philosophy and political thought and intellectual history from the University of Cambridge, and his AB in history from the University of Chicago. Before entering graduate school, he worked as a scuba diver and specimen collector at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole and as a program director at think tanks in Washington, D.C. and Berlin. Anna has taught previously at the Committee on Degrees in Social Science at Harvard, as well as at Deep Springs College, Columbia University, Barnard College, and SciencesPo in Paris. She received her PhD in history from Columbia University and her BA Phi Beta Kappa in literature from Barnard College. Prior to her academic career, she danced professionally. So thank you so much for joining us here today, Justin and Anna.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks, Jacob.
We're delighted and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so before we dive into what Gull Island is all about, on here on the podcast, we always ask people what you were doing, where you were, what was influencing your life when you were 18 to 21 years old, kind of the age of some of the students that we're working with. So Anna, do you want to start? Where were you during that time period, and what was shaping your life at that time?
Sure. Thanks, Jacob. What was shaping my life at that time was the last line of my bio, which is that I was dancing professionally. So at that time in my life, I was at Barnard College, and I went to Barnard thinking it was going to be the last 4 years of my life when I read a book, because after college, I had planned to, dedicate my life completely and fully to the studio and the stage, which in some corner of my brain, I supposed excluded reading. Not really sure why. In any case, so I was dancing and being an English major, and I suppose that the experiences and relationships from that period in my life, was, I think, began to believe that the disembodied life was probably not worth living. So everything about my life was shaped toward kind of embodiment and the connection between ideas in the mind and practice in the body, and vice versa. I was very devoted to the dancers and dance companies and communities that I was a part of. So I think thinking hard and learning a lot about what it meant to be a member of a kind of community and what it meant to do collaborative work and collaborative learning. And then, throwing myself wholeheartedly into the study of great texts in the Barnard College, vision. So kind of critical revisionist history of the Western canon, I suppose.
Yeah, great. Thank you. What about you, Justin?
So when I was that age, I was an undergraduate. During the academic year, I was an undergraduate in the University of Chicago, going through a personally transformative experience of Chicago's core curriculum and liberal arts course of study. And during the summers, as I guess was in my bio, I worked on boats. So I was working as a specimen collector for a marine biological laboratory, collecting sea animals that were used for research. That also involved a lot of scuba diving. And I was also doing other kind of odd jobs, mostly on boats. And I think that I had, in that sense, a kind of, a partitioned life, maybe. I was aware and committed to and kind of, enthralled by the questions, the high level questions about, what it means to live a good life that I was exploring at the University of Chicago. And then I also, during the summers, had this really, very sort of physical work. And I think I was aware at the time that the two didn't really, wasn't clear to me how they fit together. I think I enjoyed maybe at the time the way in which they didn't fit together, but it also left a lot of kind of unresolved questions that, I've been able to return to.
Yeah. You can see in both of your biographies, and your interests, and also, in the kind of descriptions of what you're doing at Gull Island, what you're just saying, how to integrate these different things that have been separated in our education and in our culture. And to go to Gull Island, it's striking that both of you have humanities backgrounds, right? And the way that you framed the goal and purpose of the Gull Island Institute, which is framed around the idea of climate change, right? In reading it, I was expecting, before really diving into your biography, thinking that you were STEM folks, right? You were thinking about climate science and about the ocean and about about that sort of thing. And yeah, so I mean, the tagline that Gull Island has put out there is reinventing liberal arts education for an age of climate change. Gull Island is a new immersive liberal arts program with a mission to prepare a new generation of democratic citizenship and care of the earth through place-based learning rooted in rigorous academics, physical labor, and student self-governance. So that you're citing the three pillars really of Deep Springs, which you both have experience with, but in this very, very different context there. So yeah, I mean, where did this idea for something there in your hometown there, Justin? How did that come about?
Yeah, do you want to take it? Well, it just occurred to me, Jacob, there's one more thing I maybe should say about sort of background about this. And I think this goes to Justin's point about sort of like these sort of different places or registers where you do different things or think different thoughts in these different places. For Justin, it's working on boats here in Woods Hole, and then also living a life of the mind in Hyde Park and at Chicago. And I think, a very formative experience for me as a young person, which again, I would not have been able to articulate to you as such at the time, but looking back on it now, like recognize this really setting this up was, a hugely transformative experience was riding the Chinatown bus from Manhattan, where I was in school, to Maine, where I was from. And I spent a lot of time traveling between these two very distinct places and thinking a lot about what it means to inhabit them, what it meant to inhabit them and inhabit them well. And so I think this sort of engagement with the specifics of place and why leaning into place as a site of learning is really significant. Was sort of the seed was sort of there. And so, it's taken a little while to be able to articulate it as the basis for, our institute. But I think Justin and I kind of share that in this sort of shifting between registers. Yeah. So maybe just as a background and then set up for maybe Justin, if you want to answer Jacob's question.
Yeah, well, as you can see, Jacob, you've hit on, I think, a rich question that has many kind of perspectives from which it can be answered. But I can fill in some more of the biographical detail, maybe to pick us up in more recent history for Anna and I. So we've been taught in a number of liberal arts settings in recent years since getting our doctorate, and what makes us tick as educators is thinking through existential problems with students and colleagues. More and more in the last couple of years, we've noticed those questions and problems shift to issues in the constellation of climate and climate change. And our interest in educators for that reason has also followed that. We taught as visiting professors at Deep Springs in 2021. What we encountered there in the three-pillared pedagogy was a tool for thinking about liberal arts education in general in a way that could be responsive to wider climate issues, by allowing students a number of different kind of perspectives and practices from which to think about what it means to inhabit a place well. And that, so it was a moment, I think, going to Deep Springs of seeing a kind of a key that fit the lock in a way of approaching liberal arts learning that was responding to a lot of kind of problems, pressures, and questions that we saw becoming very live in the traditional university system, but which the traditional university system kind of lacked the resources and structures to address.
I would also, Jacob, just come in and say sort of like a few other things for context, just kind of add some color to Justin's answer, which is, Justin and I, Justin's from here, from Woods Hole. I'm from Maine. We very much identify as like coastal Northeasters or New Englanders, if you will. So, it was like a real experience to be out in the desert and to feel very dislocated from one's place that we knew like in our bones, in our DNA. So I think that was a sort of very interesting experience to kind of reflect on, well, what is the role of place in all of this? And then the other thing to say is that we had just been teaching a year of Zoom university at Harvard because of the pandemic. So there was a lot of thinking about, well, what is the role of place in education, both for us as faculty members and for our students who were just like violently uprooted in all senses of the word, from any sense of place that they might have had prior to, having to leave campus. And so then a lot of questions and discussions really did revolve around place and habitability.
Yeah. Well, I really identify with that on a personal level. I mean, first of all, having been a Deep Springs student, going from a place here in the Midwest in the driftless region where I feel really rooted and familiar, and then having the contrast of the desert, right? That was very, it was powerful and value. And similarly, the year I was also spent a year at University of Chicago in Hyde Park there, and that was kind of my urban experience. And those kind of contrasts, and a lot of thinking about the structure of society, structure of our relationships to the environment and the economy in different places, and that I think it's striking as we've gone through the interviews of people who are picking up these initiatives around the country and around the world. Many of them are people who have deep roots in a place, but then have gone off and have had an academic career or some other an artistic career of some kind, and are bringing that back to the place that they're from, and that's like, it seems an important piece of a place-based education is to have somebody who's got some deep roots there who can kind of enliven that space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I love how you put that, Jacob, and I think it's a great development. So much of kind of the traditional liberal arts or even higher education approach is rather placeless. Classrooms are designed to look the same anywhere. Campuses in many ways are replicas of each other. But what they efface, therefore, is the place where learning takes place. Yeah. And, this is something we can also get into a little bit more in the conversation, but universities have this tremendous potential that they, are not utilizing insofar as the learning is not kind of rooted in the place. Yeah. And maybe they need folks who are really, able to think at a high level about the places that they're committed to.
And I think for Justin and I, we have PhDs in history. So, the historians in us is like ready to go and ready to lean into the specifics of these places from a, say, more humanistic angle. But I think going back to a question that you had earlier, sort of surprised that we're not STEM folks. I think that there's, we should also say, like, I think, and Justin can speak to this, obviously, this is his perspective, but you grow up here, you grow up in the context of scientific institution, and you work as a diver. Your job is sort of in the name of science, right? And scientific inquiry and rigor. And that shadow around here looms quite large.
Yeah.
And I think, just kind of as an aside, my PhD research was about a group of German dancers who understood themselves to be scientists, and science in the sense of a systematic knowledge of nature and the universe. So, I think that one thing that we found teaching, in the programs that we run so far at Gull, and the kinds of faculty who are really drawn to participate in what we're doing, we just had a chemical oceanographer in our last program assign an Ursula Le Guin story about language.
Right.
So, I think that there's a lot of really exciting, and for her, that's very much in line with the kind of scientific inquiry that she does about, carbon acidification. So
also, just maybe the last thought on this, because I think there's another way of approaching or understanding the climate problem, and this is an understanding that is sort of gaining ground, certainly beyond the academy now, but there as well, is that it's an everything problem. I mean, it's not a problem that will be kind of understood and solved by scientific knowledge as it currently exists. So if we're thinking about what kind of citizens will be good citizens in an age of climate change, ecosystem transformation and collapse, geoengineering, new and at this point perhaps unimaginable projects of resiliency and social transformation and upheaval, those are the kind of citizens that I think educational institutions need to think about how they're going to develop now. And that's certainly a question that is just as much about the social sciences and the humanities as it is about the natural sciences.
Yeah, it's reminding me of one of the themes we've been exploring here in the podcast has been the history, the example of the folk high school movement in Denmark, the Danish folk high schools, and if you read back into the history of where that movement came from, and how important it was in forming the kind of identity of Denmark and the other Scandinavian countries, which famously have this great kind of cohesion and have a great sense of being able to do big social projects as a people. The folk schools have an important part of that. The origin story has to do with a big external threat, right? It has to do with Bismarck's Germany, right? And so it strikes me that the way that you framed the mission of Gull Island, maybe the climate crisis is our Bismarck, right? It's our it's a democratic sense, a sense of peoplehood in the face of an external threat. In this case, it's kind of a global environmental crisis.
I mean, I just want to say, to Bismarck's credit, though, he did pioneer, public health care. So maybe there's there's some good, not all bad, but yeah.
Well, from perspective of little Denmark, right? They have very particular things they were concerned about.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's really, I love the way that you frame that, though. That's super interesting.
Yeah. Cool. So, since the place is so important, tell us a bit about your place. What is the region there like? What are its important kind of qualities that a student who arrives there is going to see and experience?
What a great question. Why don't you take it?
I mean, I'll start. So the islands where the programs take place are on Buzzards Bay, Vineyard Sound area of Massachusetts, and it's because of relationships that we have with some great institutions and partners on these islands that we're able to run the programs, and they just contribute a lot to what we're able to offer. But they take place on Penikese Island and Cuttyhunk Island. So Penikese is a small island that is now a bird sanctuary owned by the state of Massachusetts. It has a very rich history, and it's a very rich history going back to an early site of settler colonization and colonial encounter in the early 17th century, with the journey of Bartholomew Gosnold to the region. It has a more recent history that has involved it being serving as a site for a school of natural history started by Louis Agassiz, very controversial and compromised in many ways, natural scientific polymath of the late 19th century who wanted to have a school to teach students how to observe nature. In the 20th century, it was a hospital for lepers who were taken against their will and imprisoned while also being quote unquote treated for leprosy in the early decades of the 20th century. In the 1970s, George Cadwallader, a military vet and educational reformer, started the Penikese Island School, which is a school for troubled boys who were in the juvenile justice system, where they lived for 9 months of the year out on the island, and there was a kind of reformatory impulse behind that. And most recently, the Penikese Island School has become, the boys' school no longer exists. It has become an immersive education program oriented towards younger students for the most part. And they run a lot of great programs for, in particular for middle-aged girls around STEM projects. And it's through a partnership with them that we work to offer our programs.
Well, maybe, yeah, let me just come in and just say, so to your question, like, what would students expect? Well, to as I think Justin's answer makes clear, expect to be immersed in the history and ecology of this place. Right. We don't have a campus of our own. We don't own property. So the programs that we run are in partnership with community partners in these areas and in these islands, the Penikese Island School being a really important one of them. We also, our most recent 4-week pilot that we did was on Cuttyhunk Island. So students worked on the Cuttyhunk shellfish farms. They learned all about oyster farming, did municipal projects on the Cuttyhunk, on Cuttyhunk, on the island itself. There was a ton of movement between islands. So the students and faculty are on boats multiple times a day going to different places. And of course, anything involving boats, you're always subject to the wind and the weather. So it's a really incredible and very powerful education if you're not from here, in learning how dependent we are on climate, on conditions, on the environmental conditions around us. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I can see that experience of being on the water, moving between islands, right? That's really like, it's a vivid kind of context to bring someone into. And I think each of these place-based initiatives have something like that, right? I think here in Wisconsin, it's primarily just the weather, it's the winter and the transition between the seasons. And then, we do a lot, in the soil, right? Really, and working with livestock, with sheep and things like that. But yeah, that there are the elements that are really characteristic of different places, and obviously there it's the sea.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, it's the sea, but also then the other side of it is island life, right? So there's I think you can appreciate this, and I'm sure there's an analog at Thoreau as well. But if you're on an island and something breaks, you can't just like pop over to the store to get the hardware store to get what you need to fix it. Like, you have to make do with what you have. If you run out of food, like, you run out of food, right? Like, because the next trip in, to get provisions isn't going to be for another 4 days. And if there's a weather event, maybe it's 5 days or 6 days. So there's a lot of really important planning and coordination that goes on, not just on the level of like staff and faculty, but also among the students. If the cook crew burns the whatever, then there's got to be some negotiation about like what's gonna, what produce is gonna get used that night instead of tomorrow night. So yeah.
islands are really interesting places to learn. You know, they kind of separate you and insulate you from the rest of the world, even as they connect you to it in different ways. And so on Penaquis, there's really just one house and a schoolhouse and a wood shop. On Cuttyhunk, there's a small town, which is very seasonal. So students are encountering both of these island places in the program, as well as the communities that are involved in them and inhabit them.
So let's talk a bit about the programs you've run. You've been active in a couple of years now, and yeah, tell me about the programs that you've staged so far, and what are they? How long are they? How many people are they? And what are students doing?
Sure. No, it's a great question. So yeah, I guess you could say we formally began in March of 2022. That's when we ran our first 1-week pilot. And we ran that pilot with about 8 or 9 students, and like something like 13 faculty. And the joke is that, I know it's a great ratio, but just everyone that we had invited to participate had said yes, because they were really enthusiastic about it, which was obviously a huge vote of confidence in the concept. And then we did the pilot, and we all kind of collectively realized this was something special. So then we decided this year we were going to pilot a 4-week program just to scale up and see what that would be like. And so we just finished this 4-week pilot program between these 2 islands. And that went, really well, and we learned a ton. And so I think moving forward, we like the 4-week model. I think we're still kind of experimenting with ways where we can kind of achieve sort of like maximal transformation and kind of greatest impact in these different kind of shorter term models. I think moving forward, we want to continue with the 4-week program or some variation on it, which has about 8 students. So it's an open application. The program is free of charge for everybody. Faculty are paid, and the faculty come from the humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, tribal educators and leaders, and community business members and partners. And then we're also in the early stages of launching a kind of partnership program or partnership programs with institutions, existing institutions, public and private universities and colleges that want to incorporate the 3-pillared approach and place-based learning into their educational communities. So that's the kind of next step, sort of phase of piloting things, I suppose.
Yeah, who are some of your partners? What kind of organizations or people are you working with?
I think we're still.
What kinds of organizations?
Yeah. There are some that are sort of, liberal arts, traditional liberal arts schools, also public universities. And we also are talking with, this is not the universities that we partner with, but other educational NGOs in the area that, are involved in place-based learning. But the real kind of the partnerships and where we see and want to have an impact on the landscape of higher education is through programs that engage students and faculty with an experience on the islands, and then also equip them to kind of seed this approach on the campus where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Because, just to add on to that, Jacob, I think at the end of the day, Justin and I are very, very committed to liberal arts and university-based reform. I think that we feel like universities have tremendous resources, much of which goes kind of wasted, we think.
Yeah.
There's tremendous potential for universities to be, leaders in terms of solving really significant social problems. And that, for a number of reasons, structural, economic, whatever, they're kind of constrained, bureaucratic, constrained, and can't do the things that they kind of often want to make good on. And I think liberal arts learning within universities really suffers. So for many students, the classroom can't be a place to ask meaningful questions about how one should live one's life. Or the liberal arts classroom can't be a place for students to really engage on a deep personal level with the questions about habitability. And how do we inhabit places well, because they're so concerned about paying off debt, or they're so concerned about any number of other things that are largely out of their control. So I think that, as we see it, the 3 pillars are a very powerful tool to affect change in the landscape of higher education. Our personal mission as an institution is oriented around the climate crisis. And the climate crisis, as we see, is a kind of everything problem. But I think that there's any number of directions that the 3 pillars as a tool can be taken in, as you very well know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe we shouldn't take for granted that everyone understands the 3 pillars here. We've talked with a couple of people connected with Deep Springs, and I'm an alum, and you guys have taught there. But maybe how would you explain the 3 pillars to a person who's never heard of that before?
We do that a lot.
So, yeah, I'm sure.
And I'm sure that this is, an explanation that, some folks who are familiar with the model will recognize, and others may not, and that we hope will be fruitful. But when we usually begin with a question or a goal that we have, which is to cultivate among our students and faculty an understanding of humans' place within the Earth's life-sustaining systems, and a capacity to act on that knowledge. So if we think about that as the kind of the goal, the educational outcome that we're seeking, we think of the 3 pillars as sort of an architecture of what you would need to develop that knowledge. And so here, just to get the specifics, the 3 pillars would be academics. So a more or less traditional classroom, seminar-based, often rooted in close textual reading, investigation, but also accommodating methods in the natural sciences and social sciences, empirical research. The second pillar, in no particular order, I should say, but is labor, physical labor. So from performing the work of meal preparation and sort of from cleaning to emptying the trash to doing all the things that you need to make a place livable, to engaging in more productive labor. So agricultural labor, land management. In our case, this focuses around aquaculture with oysters, but it also focuses around helping to manage and maintain the bird sanctuary on Penaquis, cemeteries, other public spaces on Cuttyhunk. And the third pillar is self-governance. So there is a space in which students and the community are able to sort of create the conditions of their collective life. They engage in setting the ground rules for the community. Oftentimes, these very early on come to focus around issues of media and devices and how often you would want to, but they expand beyond to think about sort of more important questions of how we should engage with communities that we share this place with. There's a real diplomatic element of that. And there's also, for us, especially as a program based on shorter term programs, a real emphasis on putting students in a position to help shape the future of the institution. So both by serving on admissions committees that admit new students, but also through outreach, through helping to connect us with folks interested in helping to spread the idea, contributing through our advisory council and our board. And, just to go back to the original question you put there, these are the 3 pillars, and, you can think about them, the work they do in many different ways. And for us, they allow us to address this question of how do you inhabit a place well from all of these different perspectives.
I should also just add too, I think one thing that maybe this, we should say clearly is, we also have we're committed to a core seminar. So I think that there's, a way also in which and when we describe the pillars to folks that might not have encountered them, the governance pillar and the academic pillar also like really reinforce each other very strongly, in the sense that, when you understand yourself to be a member of a polity or a member of a community, the stakes are really high. And so then when you walk into the seminar room, the stakes are really high in the seminar room. These are people that you're living with, you're self-governing with, right? Communicating with, and you're thinking with. So you can't just say something in seminar and then just kind of like walk away from it, right? And so I think
it's not Twitter or something like that, right?
Exactly. And I'm sure I'm curious, what folks at, what people at Tidelines or Outer Coast, or what your students would say too, because I would imagine it's kind of similar in all cases, that the dual, I mean, I think you could say all three altogether, but especially governance and the seminar space, like it just raises the stakes of everything that happened.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I mean, one of the things that we get from Henry David Thoreau and the kind of the transcendentalists we're referencing is, I mean, Thoreau in Walden in his life is making a lot of use of practical experiences, you could say labor experiences, for cultural purposes, right?
Yeah.
Using, thinking about, you're building a cabin, you're growing a garden. It's not just doing those things. You're actually you're enriching your kind of hoard of metaphors and of references, and it's a typical move of Thoreau to say, I was doing this thing, I was planting the beans or whatever, and that will go into a literary, spiritual, kind of philosophical kind of reflection of some kind.
Yeah.
So I do think there are ways that the labor feeds the academics, and of course,
and it goes in both directions across three pillars. I mean, I think that both labor is a place where it's learning, learning happens, but also like a kind of metabolism of what you have in the classroom takes place. For us, the other dimension that's really come up is the way in which self-governance involves more than the human community. Like, to give you an example, we share the island with many hundreds of nesting seagulls. When we are during a portion of the year, this is the island of Pennakees, and a lot of some of self-governance questions did really revolve around, how do we share this place with all of these seagulls? Like, what is an appropriate relationship to this place, both as one inhabited by non-human beings, like pretty densely, but also its status as like a designated nesting area and protected nesting area of these. And so like, I think that when you combine the three pillars with the climate focus, it does become this laboratory for a question that's going to be confronting everyone, which is, when we make decisions, we're making decisions for more than society. We're making decisions for the earth now. And how do you kind of pilot the forms of self-governance that in which that can be real? And so, that's also a dimension of I guess the way in which the three pillars connect.
That's cool. Yeah, that's great to think of. So a lot of these self-governance activities you're talking about, I mean, they're happening after the students leave Pennakees Island? Is there an ongoing relationship with the community of people who've been students there?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is really important to us, and I think this kind of gets to sort of the ways in which we're still piloting different sort of versions of what our programs kind of look like and with whom. When you leave a program, that's where the real work begins, and that's the really like exciting moment. So, I feel like I scandalized our most recent cohort when I made the suggestion in seminar that they should all be really excited for the program to end. Like, oh, what do you mean? And I was like, well, yeah, that's because now you're going off into the world, and now you're doing the good work that this is preparing you for. Like, you should relish that future. Of course, I backed it, toned it down a little bit and let them kind of mourn the wonderful 4 weeks that they've had together. But so I think we in our programming make an effort to support and facilitate whatever transformations and learning happens during programming in the rest of the year. So that is through, simple things like mentorship and reading groups with students and faculty. We have a program called Pathways to Service that we are in the process of launching, where we connect Gull Island alumni with different community partners through internships and jobs. The idea being that the work or that, one takes one's education at Gull and moves forward to make a public impact in some capacity. We have a group of recent graduates, some of whom have participated in Gull programming, some of whom have just been our students or connected with us through different educational institutions that we've taught at over the years, who are really excited about what's happening at Gull, but maybe they themselves are not able, or for various reasons can't participate in specific programs, but are kind of self-organizing around different events and different things that they can do that are kind of Gull adjacent. So I think speaker series, getting out the word, mentorship, just conversations with students. Because I think one of the other things that we've discovered is that, liberal arts learning. So if we want to then take kind of what is liberal arts learning? Well, it's a kind of education that prepares one to be a member of a polity, apart from any specific vocational vocation, let's just say. So liberal arts learning is not something that should end when you're 21 and you graduate from college. That's absurd, right? It's something that should continue throughout your whole life. As educators, we have the immense privilege of continuing our liberal arts education every day in our encounters with our students and other faculty.
Show and tell. That's actually, yeah.
Right. That's what we do.
The perks of the job, right?
Totally. And it could be one of the burdens too. I don't know. Sometimes it's a bit much, but I think that that's not something that should be the exclusive terrain of scholars and teachers, right? That's for everybody, because we're all members of a polity. So one of the cool things that this grad group is sort of doing is they're thinking about creative ways that kind of conversations about particular texts or reflecting on one's liberal arts learning can continue, between people who are, say, like doing consulting for a municipal green transition, or somebody who works like at an aquaculture farm, right? So I think that formalizing some of those programs is definitely part of the meaningful and real work that we're doing this year. Now that we have some sort of more solid footing in terms of the institute.
Yeah. Wonderful. Great. I really am appreciating your use of the word liberal arts. It's something that I've observed in the process of this process of starting at Thoreau College and then doing the podcast, is that I think the term liberal arts has gone through kind of a complex journey, and my sense is that it's actually turning a little bit, and more people are comfortable using it in new ways, in the ways that you're doing it. But for a while, it was like a word that nobody wanted to touch. It was a term that was like the left and the right, and it was like everyone had a different negative take on it, and which was sad, because I think it's a really important concept and an important kind of a part of our cultural heritage that it'd be sad to lose.
I mean, please.
No.
Well, I was just going to add, Jacob, I mean, I have to say, I really appreciate your description of the podcast itself, because I think that, I mean, and I appreciate what you say there, because I love the term liberal arts. I think it's really important, and for all the reasons you identify. I mean, I would also say, there's a lot of hand-wringing about the liberal arts being in crisis. And I think that, our position, and less attention paid to the very interesting and innovative and exciting things that people are doing to address, let's say, problems in higher education or sort of social problems more broadly. I think that our position is where we feel like the liberal arts are not in crisis. They're actually like very well poised to be a great tool to enable lots of people and institutions to do things that they can't otherwise. So, and in fact, as when we put on our historians hats, we say, well, maybe it's been the case that the liberal arts have always been in crisis since their inception. And actually, finally, we're getting to a place where they're doing cool stuff, where it's not just a reserve of the elite, or it's not just a space for separating thought from work, or cordoning off, a life of the mind from the messy reality of society. But finally, we're getting to this place where liberal arts learning is actually preparing lots of people to engage meaningfully as citizens.
Yeah. I think that what people have been, one of the critiques that's correct about liberal arts as they have been manifest is the one-sidedly academic kind of focus, like the three-pillared kind of the holistic approach that Deep Springs has modeled, and that we're both bringing is an important counterbalance to many of the critiques of the kind of narrowness and the kind of the theoreticalness of liberal arts that has been practiced.
That's because I was about to follow up, Jacob, and ask why do you think the term carried this taint for so many years that now may be kind of washing off, but it's certainly the case that the liberal arts, going back to classical antiquities, not merely in the West, not merely in Greece and Rome, but in other civilizations as well. The curricula that was meant to deliver on a preparation for life with others has always changed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're thinking about it, what it meant in, say, Rome, if you're thinking about what it meant in 15th century Florence, if you're thinking about what it meant in Germany in the 19th century, it's not merely that the topics have changed, it's that the different practices of education have changed. And it's easy to forget that in the span of a lifetime, but the liberal arts are always up for grabs.
Yeah. And if you think about what it takes to prepare a person to really be empowered to take an active role in their polity or in the world or in practical spheres, it is students that and I'd like to ask you in a second about who the students are that are coming to Gull Island. What are they looking for? But the students that I'm seeing are people who maybe they've been good in school, they've liked books, that's a certain portion of it, but they feel totally disempowered in practical.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know how to feed myself. I don't know how to work with tools. I don't know how to survive outside, things like that. And that's every bit as sort of, if you want to, liberal arts, free human beings who are able to really enact their lives like that, hands-on, and also the social dimension as well. That's another area of action that people feel disempowered. What can I do in the mass, political society that we live in? And so the other two pillars are as important, and perhaps in some cases more lacking than the kind of the mental and the academic focus that has been long associated with liberal arts at least in most recent times.
Yeah, I would say that's interesting. For us, I would say the students, I'd be curious if you ask this question to our students, how they would self-identify here. But our overwhelming, I'd say all of them are really in search of academic rigor. And with the passion with which they mow and go about their land management, labor pillar duties, it's with the kind of, it's definitely leading with the academic pillar in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of that just reflects us and our sort of position and network effects, and the fact that, you know, we're academics, and that you know, I think the rigor with which we kind of have created and engage with the core seminar is kind of allows for that. But I would also say there's students who want to be a bit kind of capacious when it comes to sort of disciplinary thinking, or thinking not even within the bounds of very specific disciplines, but just are kind of yearning for kind of capacious, rigorous thought. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, but also, you know, maybe, I don't think this is you know, detracts at all from the academic seriousness. In fact, it's a dimension of it. But they're interested in like ideas having consequences, and so you know, what we talk about in the classroom, for instance, is going to shape the kinds of work that we find meaningful, the kinds of work that we're able to think of as meaningful. We're not going to be able to follow through on that unless we're working like that. It's just a broken circuit unless it involves the embodiment, even for folks who are, you know, super intellectual or academically inclined. And the other, this is a bit of a side note maybe, but the other thing just to add, you know, that we've found, even though as you say, we do kind of like foreground the climate dimension of this, is that our applicants and the participants in the program have been more than what one would describe as like climate activists. And there's certainly that dimension of interest, which, you know, is great. It's great for us. It's great for like climate activists and climate activists in training. But I think it's important too that we appeal to a larger swath who are just thinking, who just want to, you know, think hard about some basic human questions and work.
Yeah, I definitely see a lot of hunger for those conversations. Whether a person is oriented towards books or towards collective action or to you know, that is actually probably the core thing that happens here, are conversations that go beyond the everyday kind of level.
That's great. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Anna, I mean, you've got, you know, with your connection, your background in the fine arts, what role do the arts play in the liberal arts, or in if at all, there at Gull Island?
What a great question. I think I'm really still kind of working this out in all kinds of ways that I'm probably not even aware of, but running the risk of sounding a little, I don't want to get too specific, but I think just to say, I was raised, like many, I think, modern artists, in a tradition of kind of post-Cold War American modernism. And I studied a lot of different forms of modernisms. And I think modernism is interesting and wonderful, but presents a very particular lens for engaging with the world. And that lens is one of critique and criticism, and maybe less heavy on the like productive solution end of things. And so I think that kind of coming from my background, you know, while the art world gave me a lot of really wonderful things, it left me yearning for something more. It wasn't able to give me what I needed, I think, to live a kind of full life. And what I understand partly now that to be is sort of thinking productively about solutions for the future, or at least something more than just a stance of critique and criticism. Like, what are we going to do? And I think this goes back to kind of what Justin mentioned, sort of one of our learning objectives is a capacity, you know, not just to kind of identify problems and think with, you know, a mindset of critique or criticism, but a capacity to act on that knowledge. So, you know, I think that in some ways my position there is just like entirely shaped by my training as an artist, and by being steeped so long in a certain kind of tradition of artistic modernism that I feel like gave me one of those things, but maybe not the other. So that's just like maybe one answer. Maybe it's a little bit heady, but I think it is true. And then, you know, I think another point to say, like, there's a lot of artistic creation and foment that happens in our programs. I mean, we read The Tempest as part of our core, and you know, one of our students who's a theater director, you know, the students kind of collectively decided to stage a scene from The Tempest.
Nice.
Using various parts of the island. It was like utterly brilliant. They were fantastic, and there's a lot of music that's played. I mean, you know, so
it was filmed.
it was filmed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember, it reminds me at Deep Springs, we staged Julius Caesar all over the ranch,
Oh my
right?
goodness.
In the boarding house, out in the, you know, in the different kind of buildings, and it was yeah, a unique kind of context there. And it was all male when I was a student, so they chose, you know, really like pretty much the most male heavy of the many male plays. So
Yeah, true. I mean, also true to Shakespearean performance too,
right.
right? It's great. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really it's an interesting question to me, because we have we've taken the three pillars and added arts to them, and added nature, sort of wilderness expeditions, close observation of the natural world, to self-governance of community, academics, and labor. And you know, I think it is I think universities and liberal arts colleges have always been a place where the arts are being practiced, but I think also not necessarily conceptualized as part of this piece in a very like full way. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I think also, Jacob, I would say my position too, and some of this comes from my dissertation research on these German dancers who didn't necessarily think that they were dancing. They just thought that they were doing life, right? So the cordoning off of artistic practice and artistic inquiry from other spheres of practice and inquiry is something that I think I kind of tend to bristle against in certain ways, or I think that it's very easy to cordon off the arts as a kind of disciplinary specialization, which it obviously is in many cases. But I think thinking about ways to integrate it into kind of other spaces, but then also to acknowledge, like, as an artist, at least it's my position, like, what am I doing? Well, I'm thinking and I'm moving, or I'm moving and I'm thinking. Like, I'm bringing the two together. And like, what do you do when you're like working on the farm? You're moving and you're thinking, or you're thinking and you're moving, right? So maybe there's this other way in which it's like, it is about finding spaces within the landscape of the three pillars where that can just kind of fit in, rather than understanding it as something separate. I don't know. It's a thought. It's a question.
Yeah. Justin, do you have a follow-up there?
No, I'm just just curious to hear more about how you think of what a pillar is, and I mean the place of the arts that kind of bleed on the one hand into academics, on the other hand into you know, labor in different ways, but are also distinct too. But that can be a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of ways. I mean, yeah, there's a weaving together. I mean, you know, with the Deep Springs three pillars, the three pillars you're working with, there's already a weaving together, right?
Yeah.
When you're really in the zone, you're in the life of the community, and the program is really thriving. Those they kind of blend together in a way. And sometimes you're talking about a book, and sometimes you're milking a cow, or you know, sometimes you're making decisions, but it really you're referencing the other things. And that certainly happens with the arts. You know, we do a lot of singing here. We do a lot of also folk arts, things like spoon carving, and things like basket weaving, things like that. So where you're working with natural materials, you're working with cultural traditions, you know, you're working with, you know, your hands, and with knives and kind of tools and things like that. And so similarly with food, we do a lot of cooking here, things we've produced. And of course there's an art form there, there's a social like context that's being developed, and there's also science, and there's also you know, there's just you know, perseverance and skills and problem solving, moving and thinking, you know, as you're talking about. So yeah, I think that Thank you for some reflections on the arts. Well, I think we're coming up towards the end of our hour here, and I guess I wanted to give a space. You've kind of pointed to this already, but you've piloted a couple of programs here. You're building a network of alumni, people who have been connected or even didn't come. It sounds like, but we're interested in being part of the community in some way. What's next? Where do you see this project going in the next few years?
It's a great, no, thanks for asking that question. We'd love to talk with you in 4 months and give you more specific of where we're at. I think that, we're very committed to, running the 4-week free program. To us, that's the sort of beating heart of what we're doing for students and faculty in the community. And so everything that we're kind of going to be testing out in over the next, let's say, 6 to 10 months, is sort of facilitating that kind of expanding its reach. So, we will be following up and are happy to kind of chat more once things are a little bit more set. But it's also the case, and too, I mean, there's a lot of fundraising that we're going to be doing. But I think our vision, our long-term vision is, we have this open application 4-week program. We have institutional partnerships that increase access and impact, and deepening the role that Gull Island faculty play as kind of public intellectuals. So, we feel and we believe that Gull Island is a space where outstanding scholars and leaders from, different knowledge communities, let's just say, can come together to produce, important knowledge that helps us kind of address the climate crisis in all of its dimensions. So I think that's another very important goal for us over the next several years.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we've talked about this at a few points in the conversation. We are focused in many ways thinking about long-term goals on the impact that we can have on the landscape of higher education, including how existing liberal arts and higher education institutions do their work. So colleges and universities are really good places to learn how to read and write well, to explore an intellectual interest, to form really important relationships and friendships. But they're not great places to think about what it means to live well in an era of climate change. We think they can be. Mm-hmm. We think they can be better. And we want to develop programs and relationships with faculty, schools, students as well, that will equip these institutions to do what they do better. So that can take a number of different forms, but that when we think of real long term in the future, that's what we want to achieve.
Yeah, that's an exciting and really a distinctive kind of a theory of change, right? Like by modeling these programs and having a lot of people experiencing them, you can have an impact on both students and faculty, and just by telling the story on other institutions, right? Because in some of these other conversations I've had with through the podcast and outside of it, Deep Springs has a kind of a great man theory of change, right? That you take give an intensive education to a very small number of people who are going to go and have an outsized impact. And I think the debate has come up among other conversations. Are we trying to replace higher education with a network of small, microcollege scale kind of organizations, or are we trying to create a supplement, a kind of a what really functions right now for people who are in conventional education, a parallel or like an enrichment in some way to those experiences. But hopefully, and I do think I really would share this vision that what we're doing is changing education in general and changing existing institutions, because that's where most people are, and those are powerful forces in our world. So
that's right, Jacob. I mean, and our mission is about democratic citizenship. So for us, this is about democracy. This is about all of us. Yeah. So I think that is maybe running the risk of saying something a bit scandalous here, but there's something anti-democratic about the Deep Springs mission. And I think, I bristle at that. And I think many other people do as well, even though I think very highly of the institution. And it was very transformative for me as a member of it for a brief period of time. But again, for us, this is about democracy. So.
Yeah, great. Well, you're doing important work and really glad to know a lot more about it now. And yeah, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much,
Jacob.
Yeah, I think this was fun.
All right.